Hello everybody! Today I'm coming to you with a book review of a book called Spellcraft and Spellwork, a guide to the magical practice of spells by Ariana Carrasca, the Oak Witch. This is the cover of the book. The book was sent to me for review. However, despite that, I always provide my honest opinions about the books or other things I review. So just throwing this out there. Let's talk about this book. I am very grateful that I was contacted to be able to review this actually, because I have to say straight away that I think this is an important and valuable addition to the broad scene of witchcraft books out there. And the thing is that you can see a lot of books out there these days, and many of them talk about the same things over and over. I think what makes this book stand out is that it helps you kind of recap all of the most important things in regards to spellcraft and spellwork and make sense of things from a broader perspective that's rooted in the history of magic, in various paradigms and models of practicing magic, and also very easy to understand practical systems of designing your own spell work that can be just very helpful, especially for folks who are maybe newer to the craft, or folks who feel like they don't have this knowledge kind of systematized in their practice and maybe are more chaotic than they would like to. So I'm just going to talk about the chapters that the book offers to the reader, and then I'm going to talk about my opinions of the book. First, of course, we have an introduction as usual. Then we go into an insight into the history of magic. And I think this first chapter straight away sets the tone for the book because it mentions all the most important historical influences that stem from, old grimoire practices, all the most important traditions, stuff like that, and kind of gives you this really concise rundown of the most important kind of schools of thought when it comes to practicing magic and the occult. And I think this is very valuable. I think this is something that I wish I had a book like this sooner to recommend to people who ask about things like history of magic and the aspects that are more scholarly or theoretical, or when it comes to the models of magic and so on, because I think many practitioners lack this knowledge. And if you want to systematize it for yourself, you need to read at least a couple quite thick tomes that divulge all this knowledge and kind of give you the background that you need to understand when it comes to where the practice that you are practicing actually comes from, who invented it perhaps, or where the roots of it are. I think folks often don't know this stuff, and that makes your practice, I think at least, a bit chaotic, and it also oftentimes causes fights in the community between people because they're just not aware that they might be talking about the same thing from two completely different models of magic, for example, etc. So in this regard, I think it's very valuable to have like this concise summary of everything. And chapter 1, as I said, is an insight into the history of magic, but what I just talked about spills into chapter 2, which is magical theory. And in this chapter, Ariana talks about all the models of magic, which is, like the spirit model, the psychological model, the energy model, and so on. And also the different distinct paths of magic, like, for example, ceremonial magic, folk magic, and animism as well, traditional witchcraft, Wicca, and so on, right? So in the first and second chapter alone, you get this, like, as I said, very concise summary of everything that just gives you a broader perspective on where things come from, and a kind of quick rundown of all of the schools of thought that are involved in that. And I think for new folks who have never studied the history of magic and the occult and witchcraft, this is invaluable. In the magical theory chapter, which I also thought was brilliant because I think it's very important for people to understand these things, Ariana talks about the principles of magic, and she walks you through some of the most important concepts, like the law of knowledge, the law of correspondence, the law of similarity or sympathetic magic, and the magic of contagion, and so on, which I think are some of the concepts that are the most like base level to understand as mechanisms behind how spell work actually works. So I think this is just brilliant. And again, what I really enjoy is the fact that she's not trying to make it more wordy than it's actually needed to be. It's like straight to the point. The book is not too thick, as you can see, maybe. So I really appreciate that, because Ariana is not wasting anybody's time, neither her own as a writer and yours as a reader, because, you know, it's to the point, which I really enjoy. Then we move on to chapter 3, which is practical magic. And in this chapter, Ariana talks about the different approaches to magic, which, as I was mentioning, you know, the folk magic, ceremonial, and so on. But she also talks about the distinctions that people sometimes make between like black magic versus white magic, or baneful versus beneficial magic, and she debunks some of those things or explains where these concepts come from, and whether it makes sense to actually follow them or not. She also talks about the various types of spells and magic that folks usually perform, which she calls this subsection the magical intentions, and she talks about basically the different kinds of magic, like protection, baneful, healing, prosperity, justice, and so on. She also talks about types of magic, so where you can kind of draw the powers from when it comes to the spells you perform. I'm not going to explain everything in detail, because, you know, if you want to know that, read the fucking book. We move on to chapter 4, which is the foundational magical practices. And I think this is also clever, honestly, to mention this, because I think, you know, I've read a fuckload of books on witchcraft and magic at this point, most of which I didn't like, I will be honest, because oftentimes they will be like explaining half of the things you need to know, and like leaving out the other half, which is important for a magical practitioner to have this like well-rounded perception of the whole spectrum of the most important aspects of the craft, right? I think this book, despite being short, is written in a very smart way. So anyway, when it comes to the foundations of foundational magical practices, you are reading about the most important practices that help you make your practice actually work. Okay, so she talks about various methods of, you know, meditation, visualization, grounding, centering, cleansing, purification, banishing, divination, protection and safety, and so on. You know, there's quite a lot when it comes to that. And what I really like is that, first of all, it's accessible, and Ariana is aware as a writer and as a practitioner of the fact that, for example, visualization is not for everybody, that some folks have like aphantasia, for example, and are unable to see images in their mind, which I think many witchcraft authors are either unaware of or forget about, and thus make their books way less accessible than should be the case in 2024, I think. As well as mentioning, you know, neurodiversity and so on. So I think she's just very conscious of the accessibility aspect, and with mentioning about these base kind of practices, she also includes exercises, which I found were really cool. They are more like, I think, modern in their form, which also makes them more accessible, and especially for new practitioners, because some of the old school practices that some folks just keep talking about over and over, they were great when I was beginning, like 18 years ago or something, but might not be as accessible these days. So I think this is, again, something that's very written in a very smart way. And then we move on to chapter 5, which is crafting spells. In this chapter, she introduces a concept of methodology of crafting spells that includes a set number of steps. I will not be talking about the whole concept because I think this is what you should be paying for if you want to know this. So if you are interested, get the book. But this kind of dissects spellwork, analyzes it, and puts it into easy to follow steps that make sense. And if you are fresh to the craft, if you are new and unsure if the construction of your spells or rituals, because I think this can be applied to rituals as well, not necessarily the other way around, I think this gives you a really good guide to follow at the beginning, like all the things to consider, all the things to prepare, how to be clear about what you're actually wanting to achieve, and so on. And the whole process of doing the spell and the methodology of that as well, including, depending on your tradition, that would include additional layers. And I think Ariana makes a really good job in terms of like having this book be written in a way that's not dedicated to any specific one tradition, but it mentions the various types that are out there, makes it neutral enough so that you can apply this to any type of spell work you do, whether you are a ceremonial type magician or a folk practitioner, right? So I think that's really cool. She also, all the while through the book, mentions like debunks stuff, mentions things that can be problematic, mentions things that can be harder, also kind of sets the reader's expectations to be realistic. So I really appreciate that, honestly. Moving on to chapter 6, we have the Spellwork Process. And in this chapter, she kind of walks you again step by step through the whole process of doing the spell work based on the structure and methodology that she introduces in the previous chapter. Then chapter 7 is post-spell procedures. And this chapter I really enjoyed because in this chapter she talks about, again, all the things to expect, how to look for confirmation whether spell work worked or not, how to tell the difference between, what you want to see and versus what's actually happening, right? Oh, and how to dispose of the spell afterwards. She mentions that this is something that's not often talked about in books of witchcraft. And I think from what I've seen, this is often lacking in the sense that sometimes some folks will mention like general procedures for how to end a spell, for example, but this is really cool in terms of giving you ideas. I often get questions personally as well about, like, for example, how do you dispose of offerings after you offer them to spirits, like after what amount of time, how, where, and so on. So she does an equivalent of this with spells, and she makes sure to make the reader aware of all the environmental factors when it comes to that. I really appreciate that, honestly, because oftentimes people kind of forget that it's shitty to just dispose of your spells by throwing them into a river or just burying them randomly or throwing them into the forest, right? So I really appreciate that she seems to be very environmentally conscious in this way. And lastly, chapter 8 is about actual spells, where she gives you some really cool spells, like for example, Evil Eye Jewelry word spell, Find Me a Better Job spell, I Am Beauty Self-Love spell, Healing from Afar spell, Safe Travels, and so on. And for each of those spells, she applies all of the rules, all the methodology and kind of practices that she first introduced to you throughout the book. So she actually shows you step by step how she would apply all of the stuff that she talked about in the previous chapters. But you can also just use those spells as they are, right? And then we move on to conclusions, and that's the whole book. In total, if we exclude the notes and the bibliography, this book in total has 92 pages. So again, it's short and sweet and to the point. It doesn't waste your time, or it doesn't try to be too wordy and explaining the same thing 5 times using different words just to make the word count bigger. Let's be honest, we see that a lot with witchcraft books, where the meat of the book is like, 20% of it, and the rest is just word salad thrown around so that the word count meets the expectations of the publisher. With this book, I'm glad that it's just, to the point. It doesn't waste your time. Overall, I really enjoyed this read, and I have some notes when it comes to the most kind of important, things that stood out to me. So as I already mentioned, it's short and to the point. It offers historical background, which I think, again, as I was saying at the beginning, I think it's very important for folks to know where things come from, because I see that many books about witchcraft, especially those more like modern and eclectic focused, they are basically telling you like all of this is about intention, like nothing matters, you can make this in whatever way you want to. No, this book actually talks about the history, about the cultural aspects, and about it makes you think about what you want to include, what makes sense for you to include, right? Consider your background, consider your beliefs, all that kind of good stuff. It also tackles the ethics and the aspect of consumerism when it comes to practicing witchcraft, and I super appreciate that. Again, she talks about the things that you might not necessarily want to buy, like crystals, which are very often unethically mined, like buying some fancy spell jars and spell candles and shit, which is just a scam, because you can just use any jars that you have left over from food you ate. So she gives you alternatives, and in this way, of course, she's also very conscious of the environmental aspects and making sure that your craft is eco-friendly, and a bit talking about the fact that it's a bit of a hypocrisy to be a practitioner of witchcraft and like this earth-based spirituality and then not care about the environment at all. So yeah, I appreciate that a lot, and I think because of that, it also makes it more accessible for everybody, not just for folks who have a lot of money and can spend it on things that really aren't necessary to practice witchcraft, right? She makes you aware of the things that are around you and what to pay attention to, and think for yourself whether you really need some kind of ingredient from the other side of the globe or not, right? So that's pretty cool. She, as I mentioned previously, offers exercises throughout the book. I think these exercises are really fun and cool, especially for people who are new practitioners. This is something that can be kind of effortlessly incorporated into your daily life to help you polish some of those skills that you have. Yeah, I already mentioned this as well, that it's inclusive in terms of, mentioning folks with aphantasia or ADHD and so on, and also in terms of, the economical status of the practitioner, of the reader. So again, as I was saying, that's kind of related to the environmental and ethical aspects that were tackled in this book. So overall, I would say this is a cool read, especially for folks who are new to the craft, or for folks who feel like their knowledge of spell work is not systematized enough, or their knowledge of the basics of the history of witchcraft and the occult, or the background when it comes to the models of practice. I think this book, in a very kind of short and sweet way, helps you systematize all of that in your mind and kind of put it into neat boxes so you can understand your practice better and the practice of other people as well who practice other paths than you. So overall, I would definitely be recommending this, especially, as I said, to fresh practitioners or folks who want to systematize knowledge for themselves. This was a pleasure to read. It took me 2 days, so it's a nice weekend read that doesn't take up, too much of your brain space, in the sense that it's not trying to use any super difficult, elaborate, fancy language to appear as if, some kind of professor was writing this for a very tiny group of people so that nobody understands. No, it's very easy and pleasant to read, and an absolute joy. So highly recommend. Thank you so much for watching, and see you around. Bye.